Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So today I wanted to discuss the compulsion to repeat trauma. So basically what that is called is trauma reenactment. That's probably the thing that most people have heard it. Is that the repeated cycle of people continuously doing the same behavior, repeating the same cycles over and over and over again. So basically that ties into people say generational curses. It ties into transference of trauma and ties into all those different avenues that keeps people in this cycle and this loop over and over and over again. So even down to like dreams, where they call it like post-traumatic stress disorder, where people continuously have the same kinds of dreams over and over and over again from the trauma that they have experienced. And some theories is that is because we reenact trauma or we repeat trauma because we are trying to master the trauma. And a lot of this, you see this over and over and over again. And it's a very complex issue in our community. So when you see things happening, sometimes you have to take a step back and say, what happened to you to make you think that way? What happened to you to make you behave that way? When we step back and look at it from, what caused you to do that, it allows us to have more empathy for a person. But do not mix up empathy and understanding with accepting. It doesn't mean that you accept the bad behavior that someone is displaying because of their trauma. So back to trauma reenactment. So for example, where you have people like Chris Brown, who stated that he witnessed domestic violence growing up, and then he in turn became violent against his partner. So you might be like, well, if he's seen it, why wouldn't he not do that? But sometimes the feeling of control, being able to control the outcome, sometimes overshadows what may be the right thing to do. So, um, for an example, like women who have been sexually abused, I'm gonna say, sometimes when they reenact their trauma, they become hypersexualized. So they're sleeping with this person, sleeping with that person, because what they're trying to do is take back the control, the loss of control that they experience. They're trying to take that back and say, I have power over my own sexual identity or my own sexuality. And some go the other extreme way of becoming asexual, where they don't have a sexual desire. Or sometimes people, in order to master their trauma, they may take, obviously, like asexual is taking themselves out of the predicament of possible future sexual trauma. But also, too, lesbianism. Sometimes you'll see women who have had sexual traumas, they may be lesbians. And they'll say, like, I hate men, I don't like men, because of sexual trauma. This is not to say that they accounts for all lesbians, but they accounts for a portion of women who may practice homosexuality. So basically what we start doing is we develop these patterns of behaviors that's hard to get out of, which leaves people stuck. Um, think about it like this. If you drive from your house to home every single day, you've been doing that for months and upon months or years upon years. And then one day you say, hey, you know what? I'm going to go to my girlfriend's house who lives around the corner, right? You're driving home, you're driving to your girlfriend's house, and then you still wind up at home. You're like, I knew I wanted to go to my girlfriend's house. How did I end up at home? It's because your mind builds up muscle memory, and so you sometimes start doing stuff and you no longer have to think about what you're doing to get to whatever end result that is. But in this case, you're like, I didn't want the end result of going home. I wanted to go to my friend's house. Or, times that you've driven home and you're like, I don't even remember driving home. Is because your mind has learned the route, and it has basically, you can dissociate from doing the tasks that you have done over and over and over again. It allows your brain not to use as much energy because you're not doing as much because you have already learned this. So always remember that only 10% of thoughts are conscious thoughts. So 90% of them are unconscious. So a lot of times people, when they are doing stuff, they don't even have any idea of why they are doing it. And it's because their mind have made associations in the past about what certain stuff means. What does this mean? What does that mean? And they have made associations. So when you are basically looking at someone, you say, hey, you ask, what's going on with you? Why did you think that? What did you hear me say? And then you repeat back to them, hey, I didn't say that. And I'll give you a perfect example. One time, I was talking to my husband, and my ex-husband now. I was talking to my ex-husband, and we were talking about Arabic letters, and he asked me like, "Hey, do you know Arabic letters?" I said, "Yes, I know them." And he said, "Can you say them?" And I instantly got upset. So I'm like, I said I know them. Why are you asking me why? Why do I know that? That's a huge trigger for me, by the way. So I'm like, why are you asking me that? I told you that I know. If I didn't know, I don't have no problem with saying I don't know. So because he had some form of emotional intelligence, he said, what did you hear me say? I said, you asked me, did I know the Arabic letters? I told you, yeah. And you said, prove it. And he was like, Zafira, I didn't say that. He said, I asked you, could you say them? Because I wanted to know, do you know the classical one, or do you know the ones that most people are taught today? He said, because the older Arabic letters are in a different order. He's like, so if you was to go to a store that have the older way of alphabetizing something, you may not be able to find something. And that's why I was asking. And I was embarrassed. I was like, oh, sorry, you didn't say that. I knew he didn't say that, but because my mind make associations that when someone does X, Y, and Z, it means this, and it didn't. And then that's when it comes with accountability, where it's like, my apologies. I made the assumption that you were trying to test my knowledge to see how smart I am, or if I would make up stories, or whatever the case may be. But that was the conversation that we had. So it also takes some maturity on people's behalf, that when their spouse get upset, they don't just jump the gun, and just sit back and say, hey, I see you became upset. What did you hear me say? And then correct it if that's not what you said, or correct the intention, because sometimes it is what you said, but the intention was not what the person may have thought that it was to be. So conversation, communicate. Remember, with communication is based off of someone else's previous experience. So if their previous experience taught them that people think that I am stupid, when you are talking to them, they may be making the assumption that you do too, because that was their previous experience. Right? So that's that. So compulsionary patterns. So some of the things that people may do when they have been traumatized is detachment. You ever been in that relationship where you're like, I don't even know if they love me. I don't know if they care about me. I don't know if they really want to be here. That's like a form of detachment. So basically, they don't let no one get too close, because then there's no loss. But let me tell you, when people are detached like that, on the inside, they definitely feel the detachment and they want to be close. They just don't know how, because that was never taught to them. So sometimes you have to think about people as human beings. Hey, They may not have been taught how to love. They may not have been taught connection. They may not have been taught how to speak appropriately. Let me help them. Let me support them. I should say, let me support them. Because support, help, and doing is different. Okay. So we should support. So as a woman, we should support our husbands in these areas, but we should not do it for them. We should not command them to do it. We should be loving and help them along. Support, help, those kinds of things. Not doing, not yelling, not screaming. Because how can someone hear you while you're yelling? No one can do that. They're not going to be able to learn. And on top of that, when someone has been traumatized or have a parent who was like absent, neglectful, abusive, physically, emotionally, mentally, financially, however kind of abuse that they may have experienced, it rewires the brain to that sometimes they have a difficulty with learning. It stops the learning process. You know, that whole saying of you are the age that you first got traumatized is true. They grow in age. They may grow in information that they may need to know, like paying a bill, getting a job, writing a resume, but they have never learned emotional intelligence. They have never learned how to love. They have never learned empathy. So we have to give people grace and time to learn these things and patience. But again, that is not to say that you stay and deal with everything. Some abuse that some people may inflict upon other people because of that's what they experience. They may need to be alone to go through their own healing process. Yes, healing happens in relationships. Absolutely, it absolutely can. But some people who need to heal may be so deep in their darkness that they may pull you into their darkness too. And then we had two people traumatized instead of one. And that's why it's important to have a community, to have a Jamaat. Because then people can pick up and say, hey, this person needs help. And we can help each other. We can help one another grow, learn, love, and take care of one another. So another compulsion pattern is familiarity. So some people are so familiar with the dysfunction that when you do give them a healthy way of being, they don't know how to be in the relationship. They don't know how to communicate. They don't know how to, and they think that the other shoe is about to drop because that's what they're not used to. So they are willing to go back to their chaos. So again, for an example, I had an ex-husband who, we were having a great relationship. Now I'm pro polygyny. We were having a great relationship. And he decided that he wanted to remarry his ex-wife who was a cheater, that didn't take care of her daughter, who was an alcoholic. That was what he was familiar with. That made him comfortable. And you may be thinking, like, how would you be comfortable? Because you know what to expect. You know what to expect. And you might be like, and I'm by all means not saying I'm a perfect woman, because absolutely not. I am not. But I've done a lot of work on myself, being in therapy myself, which I am a pro therapist, advocate, recovering. I speak about a lot of that in my personal memoir that's called To All the Men I Thought I Loved, that's available on Amazon. And basically, like, I've been through a lot. And so I've learned that my problem is not everybody else's problem. Any kind of bad relationships that I've been in was because I chose that relationship. There was a choice. And it was a choice to stay in the relationship. I don't blame no one for any failure in any relationship that I've had. I'm the common denominator in those relationships, not them. I chose them. And just like my ex-husband, he chose them. And when I pull up history, and when I say I pull up history, I mean as a therapist, when I pull up people's history, I see the generational transference of trauma from generation to generation to generation. How the father treated the mother, or how the mother treated the father, or how the parents treated the children, that they passed down onto their children and their children's children. So then it takes time that someone has to break the pattern where you can say, this is my family history, and this is what I'm doing now. So I have a lot of history in my family of childhood sexual abuse amongst my siblings, and in our whole section. I don't know about, my parents and her siblings. I don't know, but it's a lot that happened there. But I said it in and ran out with me. Alhamdulillah, Allah has protected my children from that. We have those kinds of conversations all the time. But what I am saying is that we have to get up and say, I can no longer blame anybody else for what I am going through. I am making a choice. We always have choices. Always, always, always. You can choose to stay or you can choose to leave. And I know what a lot of people will say, well, what if this or what if that? You don't think that other people have that same struggle and got out? It's going to be it may be a hard road. It may involve some shelters. It may involve sleeping on some people's couches, but that's when your faith comes in. Your faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He is going to provide you with the risk that you need, because He's a provider. That's what He said. I always tell people it's so important to learn the names of Allah, because when you learn the names of Allah and you know what He is capable of doing for you, you're willing to you're more likely to take more risk in doing good for yourself and good for others. So again, two compulsionary patterns is detachment and familiarity, where people may stay stuck in a situation because it's familiar. They stay with their man because it's familiar. They stay with their woman because it's familiar. It reminds them so much of their parents. And they want to master their trauma. The next thing is some self-hatred. A lot of adults definitely internalize the abuse and trauma that they experience and start having a lot of self-hatred for themselves. Where, again, it pulls back into the familiarity, because you feel like, this is all I deserve. This is all I can get. Why would I deserve more? And we take it and we take it and we take it. And that's not what we deserve at all. We as people in general deserve so much more. And when I mean taking, I mean even taking our own crap that we tell ourselves. We'll tell ourselves all kinds of nonsense. Oh, I'm stupid. Oh, I'm ugly. Oh, I'm not worth this. No, I can't get that. Who said that? have yet to meet anyone who has had negative thoughts about themselves. And when I asked, where did you first hear that from? It wasn't their first thoughts. They heard it from their mom. They heard it from their dad. They heard it from their peers. A lot of those negative thought patterns that we have is not even our own. And then here come the whispers of Shaitan, whispering in your ear, telling you how you're not good enough, telling you ain't gonna never be nothing, telling you might as well continue to do these sins because you're gonna end up in the hellfire anyway. Because one of the things about Shaitan is that he never attacks you with completely like, oh, stop worshiping Allah. It's small things. I'm not worth it. I'm not worth it. I'm not worth it. So next thing you know, you stop praying. Then you come out your hijab, or you go to the liquor store, or wherever it is. Self-hatred is a huge one. Then we go on to abandonment. That's why a lot of men are not in the homes. They've been abandoned, and then they abandon. They've been abandoned, and then they abandon. And it goes on and on and on and on and on. Where it started from doesn't matter. The why is great. The how is more important. And what we need to do next is even greater. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said He does not change the conditions of the people until they change what is within themselves. So you have to do something different. You can't just say, I want things to change. I'm going to make dua about things changing. But you do absolutely nothing different. You have to do something different. And you have to reflect on what you are doing and is it really different? Because sometimes we'll say, I did do something different, but the difference was pointless. Like, I'm going to give you an example because this was funny. It was a joke, but it drives the point home. I had a brother one time ask me, like, where are the good women at? I said, you have to do something different for you to find a good woman. He said, yesterday I had on purple socks. Today I have on yellow. I thought it was hilarious. Now, that wasn't the real colors that he said, but that's basically what he said. And I thought it was so funny. Because, yeah, he did something different, but it was a useless difference. So we got to make sure that the things that we are saying that, oh, we're going to do something different, we have to make sure that it's actually something different. Because it's pointless to do something different. And it's useless, basically. So another thing is triggers. Ooh, triggers are a big one. It's a biggie. I always like to call my triggers a shotgun. Because when I'm triggered, I literally hear in my mind, like that's just how I feel when I'm triggered by something. That's huge for me. So when you are triggered by something because of, some previous past trauma, your frontal lobe literally goes offline. And your frontal lobe is where you make executive decisions at. So you wonder why, like, oh my goodness, when I got triggered, I couldn't think. I didn't know what to say, because also too, the part of your brain that goes offline too is your ability to communicate words. So that's, we say, it goes back to pre-verbal thought processes or something like that. So when you go through something that's a trigger, everything is going offline and your animalistic part comes back on. And so then you are acting out. So that's the fight, flight, or freeze response. And then you sit there and you say, I don't know. I can't tell you what happened. I don't know. It's because you literally can't put words to it. And so that's why you come to therapy, to help put words to your experiences. so that you can talk them out. And then lastly, another compulsionary pattern is fear motivated behaviors. So sometimes you're in a relationship with someone, and out of fear, you may break up with them. You're just like, I don't want to be with you no more. Because you're afraid that they're going to leave you and abandon you. So I'm going to be the one who abandons and take control so that I won't be abandoned. Okay. So sometimes people will leave someone else, not because they really want to leave, but because they're afraid. They're afraid you're going to leave. They're afraid you're going to be abandoned. You're going to abandon them like everyone else. You're going to treat them as bad as everybody else. They're not worth being treated good. But another thing somebody may do too, who have fears of abandonment, is they may become clingy. They may cling to you. Like white on rice. And you're like, goodness gracious, they won't leave me alone. And if y'all both had trauma, you may love the clinginess. Like, yes, cling. It's not healthy. It's not healthy to be like that. And so that's where you go to therapy to look at your thought process and see, hey, what can I do differently so that I can have a more healthy, balanced relationship? Because the only person we should be clinging to is the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I promise you, if you follow the blueprint of the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, everything that you need to do to correct stuff is right there. It is right there, and you're capable of doing it. You just have to do it differently. So another thing that someone does who has been traumatized, they start having rigid defenses, right? So basically what that is that they seem like so like stubborn and a rigid person when you see them. And you're like, goodness gracious, why are they so rigid? A lot of times because they're trying to control every single hair on everybody's head, on their own head, to avoid the trauma. So they become controlling. And this is still a form of trauma reenactment. Because even though you may not really be reenacting a trauma, you're trying to avoid it by doing stuff, which is what people who have PTSD do. One of the things is you try to avoid things that remind you of the trauma. So some people become rigid to try to avoid the trauma. Right? And then we have affective dysregulation. So that's basically, I'm just going to simplify more of like emotional dysregulation. You ever see someone where they seem like they're all over the place? And I'm not talking about someone who has bipolar disorder, or you have a mood disorder, which is actually trauma increases your risk of having a mental health disorder later in life anyway. But what I'm saying is that person where and people confuse this with bipolar disorder. They be like, "Oh, I'm so edgy. I'm quick to my temper." No, that's emotional dysregulation. And so your threshold of discomfort is very low. So it'll make you act out quicker and easier. Like me, I told you, I look at my trigger as a shotgun. But over the years, I've learned to hear the shotgun. It was like, and it's just like, go sit down somewhere, go take a walk, go running, all of that kind of stuff to calm yourself down. And then I go back to address whatever it is. So then you have people some types of dysregulation. I call it hypoarousal or hypoarousal. So some people, they're always, the hypoarousal, like anxious, already in the fight or flight mode, like all the time. And then you have people like me who's more of a hypoaroused kind of a person. So I always get the, you don't never care about nothing. Your face is always, and it's like, no, it's not that I don't care, but I don't care. I don't know how to explain it. It's not that I don't care, and I'm like, that's very important. I'm gonna make sure I'm gonna do something different, but I don't care enough for me to become aroused outwardly. But it doesn't mean that on the inside that my adrenaline is still not running, that my heart is not still racing. It's just I've learned to cope that way, that is hypo aroused. I look like that on the outside, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm not like that aroused on the inside. Okay. So I hope all of that makes sense. But last but not least, one of the things that a lot of people who are traumatized experience is called dissociation. So dissociation is basically when something is happening, basically it's like a form of amnesia. So again, I'm gonna go back to like driving home, right? I'm quite sure all of us have done it where you drove home and don't remember how you drove home. That's a dissociation, right? But when you are traumatized, sometimes you forget parts, important parts of the trauma, where you may remember, I'm gonna use my case for example, you may remember um, your stepdad walking into the room, but then you don't remember what happened during, but then you remember him walking out, right? Not saying that that's my story, but I really don't remember. I remember him coming in. I remember us, how me and my friend was, but I don't remember anything after that for real. And it's just like the memory just stops there. So not that my mind don't remember it. Trust me, my unconscious mind remembers it. That's why I may have small triggers that I'm not even aware of. So a shotgun may go off because I'm experiencing something and I have no idea why. Because my mom may have associated stuff with the particular traumas that I've experienced. And that's why we got to give ourselves grace and give other people grace. But don't confuse understanding and empathy with being a doormat and accepting any kind of behavior because the person says that I am traumatized. Islam is about balance. Take the middle road. So inshallah ta'ala, I hope that this helps about what trauma reenactment is, what people have done over, well, I didn't talk about what people have done over the years, but going to therapy and learning ways in which you can disrupt your cycle. You can't do nothing about the trigger because the trigger is going to be the trigger, but you can do something different about what happens, and or you can think differently about the trigger. So in my practice, a lot of people come in like, I'm trying to develop coping strategies. I says, yes, coping strategies are great. I definitely want to help you with coping strategies. That's great. However, we need to dig up what this stuff means to you so that you won't even be triggered to have to do a coping strategy. I hope that makes sense. So, like for example, one of my um, made up triggers is maybe I don't like being hit, right? Because if somebody hit me, that means that that means that I'm not worthy of someone not putting their hands on me. I'm not worthy of that. We may go through the process of learning what makes you worthy of a healthy relationship, right? What makes you worthy of someone not putting their hands on you? So we'll do stuff like that and talk about ways in which you are worthy, affirmations. Because once you start changing the way you think about yourself, it's stuff you stop tolerating. I understand, but I'm not tolerating it. And I think that as women need to stop doing that also, as we'll say, oh, I understand why he's like that. I understand. You don't understand. You don't understand. Because if you understood, you would leave. You're tolerating. You may understand it logically, but you don't understand what that really means to you and what that's doing to you and how you're losing yourself. That man has to fix himself. That woman has to fix herself. No one can do it for you. So I hope this helps. And I hope that we can be a generation of cycle breakers, where we stop doing those things that's harming ourselves, harming the community, and harming our children. May Allah guide us and grant us all emotional, mental, and physical healing. Amen.